The Grand Colosseum of Vextar Prime stretched across the horizon like a metal mountain. Ships from across the galaxy descended toward the massive structure, each one more impressive than the last. The Krathen arrived in vessels that looked like flying fortresses, their hulls thick enough to survive direct hits from plasma cannons. The Valinari ships moved without sound, their surfaces rippling like liquid metal as they bent space around themselves. Inside the Colosseum, beings that most species only knew from nightmares gathered in a vast circular arena. The Krathen delegates stood 12 feet tall, their diamond-hard shells gleaming under the artificial suns. When they moved, the sound was like boulders grinding together. Their leader, General Vorthok, had personally conquered 17 star systems. Scars across his carapace told the story of battles that had destroyed entire worlds. Across from them, the Valinari sat in perfect silence. These beings looked almost human, except for their completely black eyes and the way reality seemed to bend slightly around them. They did not need to speak. Their thoughts moved directly into other minds like cold fingers. Ambassador Zixith had once stopped an entire rebellion by making 10,000 enemy soldiers forget how to breathe. They remembered only after they surrendered. The Zephyrian delegation was the most disturbing sight in the arena. They had once been organic beings, but now more metal than flesh remained. Cables ran under their skin like veins. Their eyes glowed with digital displays. Weapon systems were built into their arms and chests. Commander Unit 47 had replaced so much of himself with machinery that his original species was only a guess. He could calculate 1,000 battle scenarios in the time it took organic beings to blink dot in the shadows. At the far end sat the Tholmari, beings so old that most species thought they were myths. They looked like tall, thin humans made of living light. When they moved, energy crackled around them like miniature lightning storms. Elder Cathera had been present when the first galactic wars began, over 50,000 years ago. She had seen civilizations rise and fall, like waves on a beach. These four species had dominated warfare across the galaxy for longer than most worlds had existed. They met here once every solar cycle, not to fight each other, but to maintain the balance that kept the galaxy from tearing itself apart. Each possessed weapons that could crack planets and armies that had never known defeat. The ceremony began as it always did. Each delegation demonstrated their newest military techniques. The Krathen showed how their soldiers could march through fields of plasma fire without slowing down. Their shells could turn direct hits from antimatter weapons into light scratches. They practiced formations where warriors linked their shells together, creating moving walls that no known weapon could penetrate. The Valinari demonstration was silent but terrifying. A single warrior stood in the center of the arena. Around him, holographic enemy soldiers appeared by the hundreds. Without moving a muscle, the Valinari began to kill them with his mind alone. The holograms clutched their heads and fell, their simulated brains simply stopping. In real battle, a single Valinari could disable an entire enemy fleet just by thinking about it. The Zephyrians moved like a machine army. Their demonstration showed perfect coordination between thousands of units. Every movement was calculated to the millimeter. They could process battlefield information faster than organic minds could understand it. Their weapon systems could target and destroy 1 million enemy positions simultaneously. They had turned war into a mathematical equation that they always solved. The Tholmari barely needed to demonstrate anything. Elder Cathera simply raised one hand, and energy began to dance between her fingers. The air in the arena grew hot. Everyone present understood that this being could turn the entire Colosseum into plasma with a casual thought. The Tholmari were living weapons that had learned to think. After the demonstrations, the beings settled back into their positions. This was when new business was discussed, though there was rarely anything new to talk about. The four species had divided the galaxy between them long ago. They occasionally fought small wars to test new weapons, but always within carefully controlled limits. Today was different. Admiral Gexran of the Galactic Council stepped into the center of the arena. The council was made up of peaceful species who governed trade and diplomacy. They had no armies and survived only because the four warrior species allowed them to exist. Gexran was a small, blue-skinned being who looked nervous standing before creatures that could vaporize him without effort. "Honored warriors," he began, his voice amplified throughout the arena, "we have received an unusual request. A newly discovered species has asked to join the warrior conclave." The arena filled with sounds that passed for laughter among these species. The Krathen made grinding noises deep in their chests. The Zephyrians emitted electronic buzzing. Even the Tholmari allowed small sparks of amusement to play around their forms. General Vorthik spoke first. "What species could possibly think they belong among us?" "They call themselves humans," Admiral Gexran replied. "They come from a world called Earth in the Sol system. They have been spacefaring for only a few hundred years." This time the laughter was louder. Commander Unit 47's digital displays showed calculations of human military capability. The numbers were so low they barely registered. These beings possessed no natural armor, no psychic abilities, no enhanced biology, and primitive technology. Their largest weapons could not damage a Krathen scout ship. "Perhaps they are seeking protection rather than membership," suggested Ambassador Zixith. The thought entering everyone's mind like ice water. Elder Kethara had been silent through all of this. Now she spoke, her voice like distant thunder. "What reason do they give for believing they can stand among us?" Admiral Gexran checked his data tablet. "They say they wish to demonstrate human military doctrine. They believe it will be sufficient to earn membership." The arena fell quiet for a moment. Then the laughter began again, this time so loud that the sound system struggled to handle it. The idea that a species with no apparent advantages could contribute to the warrior conclave was beyond ridiculous. "Very well," General Vorthik declared. "Let them come. Galactic law requires we give them the chance. It will be amusing to see what these soft creatures think passes for military training." The other delegates agreed. They would allow the humans to embarrass themselves, then return to serious business. None of them could imagine that in less than 24 hours, their understanding of warfare itself would be forever changed. The human ship appeared on the edge of Vextar Prime's sensor range exactly 24 hours later. The alien warriors had expected to wait much longer. Most species took weeks to prepare for a presentation to the warrior conclave. The humans seemed to have simply shown up. Commander Unit 47 analyzed the approaching vessel through his enhanced optical systems. The ship was small, roughly the size of a Krathen supply transport. Its hull was white metal with no visible weapon systems. There were no energy shields crackling around it. No escort ships flanked its approach. It looked more like a research vessel than a military craft. "Perhaps they are lost," General Vorthik rumbled, his voice carrying amusement. "This appears to be a civilian craft." The ship docked at the Colosseum's lower levels. Through the viewing screens, the assembled warriors watched as a small group of humans emerged. There were only 12 of them, led by a female with short dark hair and simple military clothing. She wore no armor, carried no visible weapons, and walked with the calm confidence of someone going to a routine meeting. The lead human identified herself as Colonel Sarah Chun of Earth's Unified Defense Force. She stood before the assembled aliens without showing any sign of fear or awe. This surprised the watchers more than they expected. Most species sent their most impressive representatives to the warrior conclave, beings enhanced with the best technology and genetic modifications available. Colonel Chun looked completely ordinary. "Honored warriors," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I am here to request membership in this conclave for humanity. I understand that we may not appear impressive by your standards. We have no natural armor like the Krathen. We cannot bend minds like the Velinari. We lack the technological fusion of the Zephyrians. We are not living energy like the Thulmari." Ambassador Zista's thoughts pressed into her mind, testing her mental defenses. To his surprise, he found them solid but not enhanced. She was resisting his probe through pure willpower alone. This was unusual, but not unheard of among primitive species. "Then what do you offer?" Elder Kethera asked, genuine curiosity in her ancient voice. Colonel Chun smiled slightly. "We offer human military doctrine. I believe it will speak for itself. With your permission, I would like to demonstrate our training methods." The aliens exchanged glances. They had expected the humans to show off their best weapons or present some technological innovation. Training methods seemed like an odd choice for a demonstration. "Very well," General Vorthik said. "Show us how humans prepare for war." Colonel Chun led the group to an observation deck that overlooked one of the Colosseum's training areas. The space was enormous, designed to accommodate the massive war exercises of the 4 warrior species. It contained every type of terrain and obstacle imaginable. Urban environments, mountain ranges, swamps, deserts, and zero-gravity zones. The human soldiers had already set up their demonstration area. Unlike the controlled, safe environments the other species use for presentations, the human setup looked chaotic and dangerous. There were no safety barriers, no medical stations, no backup systems. Just harsh terrain and what appeared to be live weapons. "We will demonstrate a standard human military training exercise," Colonel Chun announced. "This is how we prepare our soldiers for combat." The aliens leaned forward, expecting to see something similar to their own training methods, perhaps slightly more primitive. What they saw instead defied all logic. A group of human soldiers began by climbing a vertical cliff face. This seemed normal until the watchers realized there were no safety ropes. If a soldier fell, they would die. The humans climbed anyway, moving with practiced efficiency. When one soldier's handhold crumbled, he fell backward into empty space. The aliens started to rise, thinking they were about to witness an accidental death. Instead, another human soldier caught the falling man perfectly, having positioned himself at exactly the right spot. They had planned for the fall. They had turned a potentially fatal accident into part of their training routine. "Commander, Unit 47's processors worked overtime trying to understand the logistics. The timing had been perfect, requiring trust and coordination that his calculations suggested should be impossible without digital enhancement. Yet these organic beings had managed it through pure instinct and practice. The exercise continued. Human soldiers ran through a field while explosions detonated around them. The explosions were real. The dirt and debris rained down on them was real. The heat and shock waves were real. But the humans did not slow down or seek cover. They moved through the chaos as if it was normal weather. "Are they trying to kill their own soldiers?" General Vorthik asked, his grinding voice carrying genuine confusion. "No," Colonel Chun replied calmly. "This is standard battle conditioning. Our soldiers train in environments that simulate the worst possible combat scenarios. If they can function in training, they can function anywhere." A Velinari warrior tried to read the minds of the training humans. What he found made him recoil. Instead of fear, pain, or survival instincts, he found something else entirely. The humans were enjoying this. They were pushing themselves to their limits, not because they were forced to, but because they wanted to test those limits. The demonstration escalated. Humans began live-fire exercises, where bullets passed within centimeters of their heads. They practiced disarming bombs while the timers counted down to real explosions. They charged through clouds of toxic gas that would blind and burn most organic beings. Most disturbing of all, they continued training while injured. When one soldier took shrapnel in his leg, he wrapped it quickly and kept going. When another was knocked unconscious by an explosion, his teammates dragged him to safety and continued the exercise. Without missing a beat, the alien warriors watched in growing silence as they began to understand what they were seeing. This was not reckless behavior. It was not poor planning or primitive equipment. This was a completely different philosophy of military preparation. While other species trained to minimize risk and maximize their advantages, humans trained to function when everything went wrong. They practiced for scenarios where their equipment failed, where they were injured, where victory was impossible. They prepared not just for combat, but for disaster. Elder Kethara spoke slowly, her voice thoughtful. You train your soldiers to accept death. No, Colonel Chun corrected. We train them to function despite the possibility of death. There is a difference. The demonstration paused for a moment as the humans regrouped. During this break, the alien observers began to discuss what they had witnessed. Their opinions ranged from confusion to horror to grudging respect. They appeared to be deliberately creating suffering. Commander Unit 47 observed. Not creating, Ambassador Zixith's thoughts were troubled. Preparing for it. They assume suffering is inevitable and train accordingly. General Vorthik was quiet for a long moment. His species prided themselves on their ability to endure damage, but they had never seen training like this. They're not trying to become stronger, he rumbled finally. They are trying to become harder to break. As the humans prepared for the next phase of their demonstration, none of the alien warriors could have guessed how much more disturbing things were about to become. They thought they had seen the extent of human military doctrine. They were wrong. The second phase of the human demonstration began with what appeared to be a simple endurance test. Human soldiers entered environmental chambers that simulated extreme conditions. The aliens watched as the temperature dropped to levels that should have been instantly fatal to unprotected organic beings. The humans wore minimal clothing and no environmental suits. General Vorthik studied his sensors carefully. The temperature in that chamber is negative 40 degrees. Their species should not be able to survive this. Colonel Chun nodded. Standard Arctic warfare training. Our soldiers learned to fight in environments where most species would die within minutes. We cannot always guarantee we will fight in comfortable conditions. The humans in the chamber did not just survive. They continued to perform complex military exercises. They assembled weapons with hands that should have been too frozen to function. They marched in formation through snow that came up to their knees. When one soldier collapsed from the cold, his teammates did not carry him to safety. Instead, they helped him stand and continue the exercise. Commander Unit 47 analyzed this behavior through multiple processing cores. This appears to be counterproductive. The damaged unit should be removed for repair. We are not machines, Colonel Chun replied quietly. Our soldiers learn to function while injured because in real combat, medical evacuation is not always possible. They must be able to fight through damage. The environmental chamber shifted to the opposite extreme. The temperature climbed to over 60 degrees Celsius. Humidity rose until the air became thick enough to see. The humans stripped down to basic clothing and continued their training. Sweat poured off them in rivers, but they did not stop or slow down. Ambassador Zixith attempted another mental probe, trying to understand the psychological state of the training humans. What he found disturbed him deeply. Instead of the survival instincts he expected, he discovered something else entirely. The humans had trained themselves to ignore their own bodies' warning signals. They felt pain and exhaustion, but had learned to function through them. How long do they continue this torture? He asked, his thoughts carrying genuine concern. 72 hours, Colonel Chun answered. This is a shortened version for demonstration purposes. Full Arctic training lasts 6 months. The alien warriors absorbed this information in silence. 6 months of conditions that would kill most species within hours. It was beyond their understanding of military necessity. The next phase was worse. The humans began sleep deprivation training. They had already been awake for 48 hours before the demonstration began. Now they continued complex military exercises while fighting to stay conscious. Soldiers swayed on their feet but maintained their positions. Officers gave orders while their eyes struggled to focus. Elder Kethera watched a human soldier fall asleep while standing, only to wake himself up and continue marching. "Why do you do this to them?" "Because the enemy will not wait for us to be rested," Colonel Chun explained. In real warfare, soldiers may go days without sleep. They must learn to function in this state, or they will die when it matters. The psychological testing continued. Humans practiced combat scenarios while suffering from simulated injuries. Fake blood covered their uniforms. Medics had applied realistic wounds that would have sent most species into shock. The humans fought on anyway, their movements slower but still coordinated. What truly unnerved the watchers was the mental state of the humans during these exercises. The Velinari continued their attempts to read human thoughts, and each probe revealed something more disturbing than the last. Where other species thought in terms of survival and victory, humans showed a complete acceptance of death combined with an absolute refusal to surrender. "They have rehearsed their own deaths," Ambassador Zixith reported to the others, his mental voice shaking. "Not once, but thousands of times. They plan for it. They prepare for it. They consider it a tactical option." This revelation sent ripples of unease through the assembled warriors. The Krathen were known for their willingness to die in battle, but even they fought primarily to live and win. The humans seemed to fight primarily to ensure that killing them would be as costly as possible for the enemy. The demonstration shifted to teamwork exercises. And this is where the aliens began to understand the true horror of human military doctrine. The humans practiced scenarios where they were cut off from command, where their equipment failed, where their mission was compromised. In each case, they adapted instantly. Most disturbing was their approach to casualties. When a team member was declared killed in a training exercise, the others did not mourn or hesitate. They immediately began following protocols designed around the assumption that everyone would eventually die. They shared information rapidly, destroyed anything that could benefit an enemy, and continued their mission with reduced numbers. Commander Unit 47 analyzed their tactical adaptations. Their doctrine assumes complete mission failure. Every protocol is designed around worst-case scenarios. Not failure, Colonel Chung corrected. Costly victory for the enemy. We train our soldiers to ensure that even in defeat, the enemy pays more than the victory is worth. A new exercise began that made even the ancient Tholmari uncomfortable. Humans practiced fighting while completely blind, their eyes covered by thick cloth. They used only hearing and touch to navigate complex obstacle courses while enemy soldiers fired at them with training weapons. When hit, they continued fighting from whatever position they fell into. The aliens watched humans crawl through mud while dragging wounded teammates, coordinating entirely through hand signals. They saw soldiers continue fighting with one arm tied behind their backs, simulating injuries that would disable most beings. They observed teams completing missions while carrying unconscious members, refusing to leave anyone behind, even when it made success nearly impossible. You train them to fight in conditions that guarantee massive casualties, General Vorthik observed, his voice carrying something that might have been respect or horror. We train them to fight in conditions where massive casualties are inevitable, Colonel Chun agreed. The question is not whether we will lose soldiers. The question is whether the mission succeeds despite those losses. The final exercise of this phase involved something the aliens had never seen before: humans practicing failure. They deliberately set up scenarios where victory was impossible, where the mission could not be completed, where survival was extremely unlikely. Then they trained for what to do in those situations. The humans did not surrender. They did not retreat. Instead, they executed protocols designed to deny the enemy as much benefit as possible from their defeat. They destroyed equipment, eliminated intelligence, and continued fighting even when their positions were hopeless. Elder Kethara spoke for all of them when she said, "You train your warriors not to win, but to make victory meaningless for those who defeat them." "Every human soldier understands that they may be asked to die," Colonel Chun said simply. "We prepare them for that reality, but we also prepare them to ensure that their deaths serve a purpose. An enemy might kill us, but they will not profit from it." The alien warriors sat in stunned silence as they began to understand what type of species they were dealing with. Humans did not train to be the strongest or fastest or most advanced. They trained to be the most expensive enemy to defeat in the galaxy. As the demonstration moved toward its final phase, none of the watchers could have predicted how much more disturbing human military doctrine was about to become. They thought they understood the psychology of this species. They were completely wrong. The final phase of the human demonstration began with Colonel Chun making an announcement that confused the alien observers. "We will now demonstrate human doctrine for total defeat scenarios. Please observe carefully." The training area transformed into a war zone. Holographic enemy forces surrounded the humans completely. The odds were deliberately impossible. 50 human soldiers against 5,000. Enemy troops with superior weapons and technology. Every tactical analysis suggested the humans should surrender immediately. They did not surrender. Instead, the humans began executing the most disturbing military doctrine the galaxy had ever witnessed. They did not attempt to win or escape. They began systematically destroying everything of value in their area, including their own equipment, supplies, and positions. General Vorthik watched in growing horror as human soldiers rigged their own weapons to explode rather than fall into enemy hands. They burned intelligence documents while enemy fire rained down around them. They destroyed food supplies, medical equipment, and communication devices. They were deliberately making their defeat as worthless as possible to the enemy. Why did they destroy resources that could help them fight? Commander Unit 47 asked, his processors struggling to find logic in this behavior. "Because those resources could help the enemy more than they help us," Colonel Chun explained calmly. "If we cannot win, we ensure the enemy gains nothing from their victory." The demonstration continued, and it became worse. The humans split into smaller and smaller groups as their position collapsed. Instead of staying together for mutual support, they deliberately scattered to make themselves harder to eliminate completely. Each small group continued fighting independently, following protocols that assumed no leadership and no coordination with other units. Ambassador Zixith attempted to read the minds of the scattered soldiers. What he found nearly made him break contact entirely. The humans were not fighting to live. They were fighting to kill as many enemies as possible before dying. Each soldier had mentally calculated how many enemy casualties they could inflict with their remaining ammunition and positioned themselves to maximize that number. One human soldier found himself cornered with no escape. Instead of surrendering, he activated a device that would destroy himself and the building he was hiding in. The explosion was simulated, but the alien observers understood that in real combat, the human would have actually killed himself to deny the enemy a prisoner and take several enemies with him. "This is suicide," Elder Kethara stated, her energy form flickering with disturbance. "No," Colonel Chun replied. "Suicide implies purposeless death. This is tactical martyrdom. Every death serves a strategic purpose. The exercise continued with scenarios that made the alien warriors increasingly uncomfortable. Humans practiced fighting while carrying wounded comrades who were too injured to fight but still alive. Instead of leaving them behind or ending their suffering, they carried them while continuing combat. When asked why, a human medic explained that wounded soldiers could still provide intelligence and moral support, even if they could not fight. More disturbing was what happened when humans were captured in the simulation. Unlike other species, who might provide information under torture, the captured humans immediately began psychological warfare against their captors. They spread false information, attempted to escape constantly, and tried to turn prisoner facilities into recruitment centers for resistance movements. The Velinari tried to break a captured human through mental domination. They found that human minds, while lacking psychic defenses, were extraordinarily difficult to control. Humans seemed capable of compartmentalizing their thoughts in ways that made extracting useful information nearly impossible. Worse, the attempt to dominate their minds often resulted in the humans becoming even more determined to resist. How do you break a species that fights harder when hurt? Ambassador Zixith asked, genuine fear creeping into his mental voice. The demonstration reached its climax when the humans executed what they called a total denial protocol. The last surviving soldiers, completely surrounded and out of ammunition, began a procedure that shocked even the ancient Tholmari into silence. They started killing their own wounded to prevent them from being captured and interrogated, not out of mercy, but as a tactical necessity. Then they began setting traps using their own bodies as bait. Dead humans were rigged with explosives. Wounded humans pretended to be more injured than they were, waiting for enemies to approach close enough for knife attacks. The final human soldier, alone and facing certain death, spent his last minutes not trying to escape, but setting up a trap that would kill the maximum number of enemies. When they came to confirm his death, he used his own body as the trigger mechanism. When the simulation ended, the alien observers sat in absolute silence. They had just witnessed a species that had turned defeat itself into a weapon. Every protocol humans had demonstrated was designed around a single principle: make conquest of humanity cost more than any victory could possibly be worth. Commander, Unit 47 ran probability calculations through his enhanced processors. The results were disturbing. In any war against humanity, victory would require killing every single human. Partial conquest would be impossible because the remaining humans would make occupation untenable. Complete conquest would require such massive resources that the victor would be weakened beyond recovery. You do not fight to win, General Vorthik said slowly, his grinding voice carrying a new tone the others had never heard before. It might have been respect, or it might have been fear. You fight to ensure that defeating you destroys your enemies. Colonel Chun nodded. Every human child learns a simple truth: freedom is not free. We are willing to pay any price to remain free, and we ensure that anyone who tries to enslave us pays a higher price. Elder Cathara, who had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, spoke with the weight of millennia behind her words. I have seen species fight to the death before. I have never seen a species that made death itself into a strategic advantage. The alien warriors began to understand why humanity, despite appearing weak, had never been successfully invaded. Any species that attacked Earth would face an enemy that considered mutual annihilation an acceptable outcome. Worse, they would face an enemy that had trained extensively for scenarios where mutual annihilation was the goal. Ambassador Zixith attempted one final mental probe, trying to understand the psychological foundation of this military doctrine. What he found in Colonel Chun's mind was simple and terrifying. Humans genuinely believed that some things were more important than life itself. They had built their entire military philosophy around protecting those things. "You have weaponized your own mortality," he said, his mental voice barely a whisper. "We have learned that the threat of death has no power over those who have already accepted it," Colonel Chun replied. "An enemy cannot intimidate us with destruction because we are prepared to destroy ourselves if necessary. They cannot enslave us with threats because we prefer death to slavery." The demonstration was over, but the implications were just beginning to sink in. The alien warriors realized they were not looking at a weak species that needed protection. They were looking at a species that had solved the fundamental problem of military strategy: how to make victory impossible for any enemy. As Colonel Chun prepared to present her formal request for membership in the warrior conclave, the mightiest beings in the galaxy sat in stunned silence, each contemplating the same terrifying truth. They had spent millennia learning how to fight enemies who wanted to live. They had never prepared to face an enemy that had made peace with dying. The balance of power in the galaxy was about to change forever. The Grand Coliseum of Vextar Prime fell into a silence deeper than the void between stars. The demonstration was over, and the most powerful warriors in the galaxy sat motionless in their seats. For the first time in their long histories, none of them knew what to say. General Vorthok was the first to move. The massive Krathan leader stood slowly, his diamond-hard shell reflecting the arena lights. He had personally led the conquest of 17 star systems. He had seen armies break and civilizations fall. He had watched entire species surrender at the mere sight of his forces approaching their worlds. "In all my years of warfare," he said, his grinding voice carrying across the silent arena, "I have fought enemies who feared death, enemies who welcomed death, and enemies who ignored death. I have never fought an enemy who had befriended death." He paused, looking down at Colonel Chun, who stood calmly before the assembled aliens. "My people pride themselves on our willingness to die in battle. We believe this makes us the finest warriors in the galaxy. But we fight to live and win. You fight to ensure that even your deaths serve your cause. This is not warfare as we understand it." Commander Unit 47's optical systems focused on the human kernel. His enhanced processors had been running calculations throughout the entire demonstration. The results troubled his logic circuits. "I have analyzed the tactical doctrine you demonstrated. In any theoretical conflict between our species and yours, victory would require the complete extermination of your population. Anything less would result in ongoing resistance that would eventually destroy the occupying force." He processed this conclusion again, unable to find any flaw in the logic. Furthermore, achieving complete extermination would require such massive resources that the victor would be too weakened to defend against other threats. "You have created a military doctrine that makes conquest of your species strategically impossible." Ambassador Zixith had been silent since the demonstration ended. His mental probes throughout the exercise had shown him something that went against everything the Valinari understood about psychology and warfare. Finally, he shared his thoughts with the assembly. "I have spent the last several hours attempting to understand human military psychology." His voice echoed in their minds. "What I found defies our understanding of survival instincts. These beings have trained themselves to value abstract concepts more than their own lives. They will die for ideas that exist only in their minds." He turned his black eyes toward Colonel Chun. "Freedom, honor, independence, justice, the protection of the weak. These are not tangible things that can be conquered or destroyed. They exist only because humans choose to believe in them. And humans will die to protect their right to believe." The ancient Tholmari had remained silent throughout the entire discussion. Elder Kef Era was older than galactic civilization itself. She had seen the rise and fall of thousands of species. She had witnessed wars that consumed entire sectors of space. When she finally spoke, Her words carried the weight of eons. "I have watched civilizations for 50,000 years," she said, energy crackling around her as she stood. "I have seen species rise to dominate the galaxy through strength, through intelligence, through technology, through unity. I have never seen a species achieve power through their willingness to lose everything." She looked directly at Colonel Chun, and for a moment, the ancient being's energy form seemed to flicker with something approaching wonder. "You have done something unprecedented. You have turned weakness into strength, defeat into victory, and death into a weapon. You have created a military doctrine based not on what you can do to your enemies, but on what you are willing to do to yourselves." The silence stretched on as each warrior contemplated what they had witnessed. The implications were staggering. For millennia, the four great warrior species had maintained galactic peace through a balance of power based on mutual deterrence. Each possessed the ability to destroy the others, so none dared to attack. It was a delicate equilibrium that had prevented total war for thousands of years. Humanity changed everything. They offered not strength, but something far more dangerous: the promise that any victory against them would be meaningless. They had broken the fundamental logic of conquest by making themselves unconquerable through any means that left the conqueror capable of enjoying their victory. General Vorthik was the first to understand the full implications. "You are not asking to join our balance of power," he said slowly. "You are offering to maintain galactic peace through a completely different method." Colonel Chun nodded. "Exactly. We do not seek to dominate anyone. We have no desire to conquer other worlds or impose our will on other species. We simply want to exist in peace and be left alone to develop as we choose." She gestured toward the aliens around her. "But we also want the galaxy to understand that leaving us alone is not optional. It is the only rational choice. Any species that attacks humanity will discover that we are willing to pay any price for our freedom, including our own extinction, and we will ensure that our enemies pay a higher price." Commander Unit 47 processed this statement and arrived at an inescapable conclusion. "You are offering the galaxy a choice: peaceful coexistence with humanity or mutual annihilation." "That is correct," Colonel Chun confirmed. "We hope the choice will be easy to make." The vote for humanity's admission to the Warrior Conclave was unlike any in the organization's history. There was no debate, no discussion of human military capabilities, no assessment of their technological development. The four species simply looked at each other and nodded. The decision was unanimous. As the formalities concluded, Admiral Gex Ran of the Galactic Council approached Colonel Chun. "I must ask," he said quietly, "is this truly how all humans think? Are you all prepared to die rather than surrender?" Colonel Chun considered the question carefully. "Not all humans are soldiers, Admiral. But all humans understand what our soldiers are prepared to do. We have a saying on Earth: freedom is not free. Every human child learns what this means." She looked around at the assembled warriors. These beings who had dominated the galaxy for longer than human civilization had existed. "We do not ask you to fear us. We ask you to understand us. We are willing to be friends with anyone. We are willing to trade, to share knowledge, to cooperate in any peaceful endeavor. We ask only that you respect our independence." "And if we refuse?" Elder Kethara asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Then you will discover why Earth's most common military motto is, 'The only easy day was yesterday,'" Colonel Chun replied. "Every day we exist as a free species is more difficult than the last, and we have learned to embrace that difficulty." As the human delegation prepared to leave, the alien warriors maintained their silence. Each was lost in contemplation of what humanity's emergence meant for the future of galactic civilization. The small human transport ship departed Vextar Prime exactly as it had arrived, quietly. without fanfare, carrying beings who looked completely ordinary. But everything had changed. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted not because a new force had emerged, but because a new philosophy had been introduced. In the days that followed, word of the demonstration spread throughout the galaxy. Species that had never heard of humanity began updating their strategic databases. The entry for human space was marked with a warning that would become standard throughout the galaxy. Approach with diplomatic intent only. Military conquest inadvisable. Species demonstrates acceptable casualty rates approaching 100%. Conquest protocols recommend avoiding contact unless prepared for total war. The mightiest warriors in the galaxy had met their match. Not in strength or technology, but in the simple human understanding that some things are worth dying for. They had learned that there exists in the universe a species that would rather burn everything to ash than live on their knees. In the end, the greatest warriors in galactic history had discovered something that terrified them more than any weapon. An enemy that had already won the only victory that mattered to them. The right to lose on their own terms. The silence that had fallen over the Grand Colosseum that day would echo throughout the galaxy for generations to come. A reminder that true strength sometimes